Back with another episode of the RotoWire Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. I'm Alan Zaslowski of RotoWire.com. This week's guest, also from RotoWire.com, Joe Bartle. Welcome to the podcast. And it's Dynasty season, right? I mean, this is startup season. Rookie season starts earlier and earlier every year. So with more and more people coming into Dynasty leagues, and the field is no longer, the field is sharp. People, the average player is starting to catch on to basic Dynasty strategy. So what do you think the edge is in these keeper Dynasty leagues heading into the 2023 season?
I think having a strategy. And I know that sounds kind of odd to say because you would assume everyone does, but I'm talking about literally a strict game plan that you have to follow, even if the board materializes in a startup league or guys are placed on a trade block that you might not anticipate. There's room to pivot, certainly, but are you going to be contending? Are you going to be tanking? Are you accumulating those draft picks that we all care about in the Dynasty format? I really think the structure is important right now, with everyone more or less having a knowledge baseline for the most part. What you do with the level of knowledge and the preparation that you have, I feel like is probably one of the bigger advantages, which is a small one, because again, you'd imagine your other 9 members or 11 members or 13 members have the same thing going on. But if you are able to, I think, retain that discipline to follow your strategy, that feels like the biggest advantage right now with where we are all at in the knowledge aspect.
You just said something that I don't think anyone on this Dynasty podcast has said yet. There's so many rudderless ships once we get, because everyone, they know who they want to take in the first round of Superflex, of regular Dynasty draft. Everyone gets good players in the first 2 rounds. In round 3, you start looking at the board and you're like, wait a second here. I'm faced with a guy who's 28 years old. That's a good player. Or an unproven younger player that has upside, and then you start getting into no man's land. So what happens when you have, how do you mentally pivot from a plan? Like, hey, I'm going to go all young. I'm going to take some upside guys. I'm going to pass on the Keenan Allen, Mike Evans types, DeAndre Hopkins. And then you're sitting there facing those guys and you're like, I'm going to take them or unproven player, wide receiver 18, Jahan Dotson or Treylon Burks or one of those guys. So how do you square that in your mind?
And I was thinking to answer your question, I go back to what I had said initially, where you have to have a plan. Normally everyone's like, all right, we've mapped out where I think this is going to go. And there's always that person who thinks for some reason Trey Lance is going to fall to the 3rd round and he doesn't. Or, oh man, I was surprised that this really clearly good athlete and rookie running back, Kenneth Walker didn't make it to the 3rd round late. So that's bad strategy. So I should amend my first statement. If you have poor strategy, abandon it quickly, because if you're assuming that Kenneth Walker is going to be available at that point, you've made a lot of mistakes. I think that's the part of going in with a certain mindset that's important, because 1 year on the clock, I think things happen differently when you're drafting, whether it be in redraft or in Dynasty. We both do the beat Alan and Joe Bartle, respectively, the online championships. There's only a set amount of time that's happening these picks. And when I'm doing my preparation before drafts, it's to remove the uncertainty that I might have. It's still going to happen, but I want to have as much preparation ahead of time, so that's almost muscle motion for when I'm making these picks and selections. I don't know if there is a point that I could honestly say right now, when I'm not in the draft and I don't have a strategy set, that I would choose to pivot to the Keenan Allens and Mike Evans of the world, or I'll continue to go ahead and draft younger receivers. I think that's something I want to have ahead of time. I want to know my league mates for the best part. I still think that's a significant advantage too, because let's just say you have a Packers fan like me, right? I was in love with Allen Lazard last year. Maybe I'd be more willing to go ahead and acquire.
I owe you money. I owe you money because of Allen Lazard.
So I feel like we all lost, because I was certain Allen Lazard was going to do fantastic, and he didn't. And I was saying he's the same guy as Drake London and Christian Kirk. No, I was awfully correct.
Just to give context to that bet, we had a redraft bet. Ready for this one? This is a mega bet. Who would have more fantasy points regardless of games played, Russell Gage or Allen Lazard? you crushed me. So I have to pay your entry fee into the Vegas League next year. But, for another time, you were rolling. I interrupted.
I don't even feel like it's a win. I was thinking about that today because I knew we were going to talk about it. And I was like, nah, I really thought Allen Lazard was going to be great, and he was not. But that's the if you knew me and you knew I was in on Lazard, maybe that's an important part. Yeah. And with the veterans specifically, I want them to be liquid from a dynasty perspective. And that means I can be able to move them however I want for draft pick, second round pick, third round pick, first rounder, if you can really make a swing. Okay. But you have to know which assets can be liquidated, right? I mean, that's the other part of this too, is that maybe people just don't want 30-year-old Derrick Henry. No, he's not that quite old, but
29, 29.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay, good. I was going off memory, and that's good enough. But that is my bigger concern. I bet you more recently it would have been Mark Ingram back in the Saints days, towards the tail end of his career. Mark Ingram was productive. I mean, he had the double-digit touchdowns at the Ravens a little bit later on. But would you really be able to move him? Was he really liquid in that sense? If he isn't, then I don't want to touch that asset, because at the end of the day, it is an asset management game when we're playing Dynasty. So that's an important context. And I think knowing your league mates, and that's why it's always good, even if you're not actually doing a trade, to have trade conversations to understand what that value might be around the league. It's far better than doing an Ask an Expert question on RotoWire, which we get plenty. I answer them all the time. Certainly feel free to do that. My job appreciates that. But it's easier if you are assessing the value with your league mates as opposed to an expert at RotoWire or whatever fantasy platform you enjoy.
So today we're going to talk about buy low wide receivers. And you hear that term thrown around a lot in Dynasty fantasy football. And we're going to give it context. And really what it means there's one of two things. And it's either players that basically are depressed because of injury or performance issues from the previous year that you still believe that will increase in value over the next 6 and 18 months. And the reason I say 18 months, it means the season and next offseason, or players that are already doing well that you think will be worth double what they're worth, by week 4 of the season. But before that, I just wanted to also underline a point you talked about player liquidity. I think that's there's two sides of it. So yes, we all want players that we can cash in and cash out of, trade for picks. But if you're in win now mode, yes, that what you said is the optimal situation. I have a 26-year-old wide receiver, not performing well. Someone else believes in him. I trade him for a younger player. But sometimes it's like, what do you care about the price of your house if you're going to live in it for the rest of your life? So if you have DeAndre Hopkins, right, and let's assume you're not total rebuild, right? Let's assume that you're a fringe playoff team. Maybe you're the 5 seed, and you're comfortable being there. You think you can make a few moves, because you hear a lot of dynasty advice where people say, oh, if you're in the middle, just tank, right? I don't always agree with that. I think that sometimes it's okay to have these guys that are illiquid, but are still high producers. Now, they have to be high producers in order to be illiquid. So you have to have one or the other. So I agree with what you said. But if they're high producers and old and have a little less liquidity, meaning like the trade value is lower than the actual value, I know I'm alone on an island, but I tend to buy those players at the discounted prices, because Hopkins is going to be that guy this year, right? He's going to be the highly productive top 12 fantasy wide receiver that there's no way you're getting a first round pick for him in Dynasty.
Okay. So Hopkins is good. I don't want to put you in the spot per se, so I'll give you a bit of a leadway, but I want you to give me some other names to put this into context. I don't think Hopkins has to be a first-round pick for him to be liquid, and I think that's the important context. Like if he is still producing it the way Hopkins does in his career, a second-round pick might be more valuable to what your structure is and what the game plan is for your team. And I'm not saying you have to tank if you're in the middle. I agree with you. I think there's too often in fantasy we just do black and white, and it's so easy. It's easier to recommend going to the tank route because it's more fun that way. You're looking forward to the rookie players. There's fun. Less work that you have to do because you're out of it anyway. So who really cares? You're kind of doing the asset management thing on the side. I think like a Hopkins player, and again, you can give me another name so I can maybe put this more into context, is fine if he's still liquid as a second round pick. Maybe you will have more value out of him, but there's a certain point where I still want to know what his value is across the league. And if it makes more sense for a second round pick, I will trade a little bit lower because that's helping my structure and plan moving forward.
Yeah. The other guys that fall into that older productive player bucket are going to be like Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett. highly productive player, wide receiver 9 this year, Joe Bartle, and you're not going to get a first round pick for him. Now, the reason I say is because think about this. Like and you're a logical, sober drafter. That's why you're good at fantasy football. You take your shots on your guys, but you also have you're grounded in reality. Like, think about this. If I gave you in this draft class 5 shots at anyone in the second round of rookie drafts who's projected to be there, or Tyler Lockett, who's going to have more fantasy points over the next 2 years, I will gladly take Tyler Lockett. And you understand what I'm saying. It's like
I do, and I actually disagree. But if you said one shot over the next 2 years or Tyler Lockett, that's different, right? Because that if you are able to get 2 or 3 picks for Tyler, even if they're not first round.
Let's say it's 2 seconds. 2 seconds.
Yeah, so Lockett is the toughest one of that group because I really don't care for him, and I think the Seahawks offense is going
put
to
your guy in there
a little bit more. But no, you had mentioned Keenan Allen, Mike Evans. Those guys I wouldn't want to trade. So I think that is a bit of a difference. I would still be checking in with my league mates to see what those guys' value are because it fits my schedule, my time frame. Maybe I like it. Maybe I want to have 3 picks in the top 20. I don't need to have 2 picks in the top 6, right? That's what we're all envying for from a dynasty perspective. There's different classes, and I think as we really gear up for the combine and we get close to the draft part of it, we'll have more. I think you'll be able to build a better plan moving forward. But there's some of these buy low receivers we're going to talk about where it's now the time to capitalize on them so that we can take a bit of that value that somebody else might have later on and capitalize on our own game. So I think that's really kind of an important clarification too.
Yeah. But this is what makes the dynasty world go round. You would rather be liquid with those second round picks. A donkey like me wants those old vets, hold on to them. And, you always say, are you in, there was a great survey that was put out a couple years ago. And I mention this all the time on the podcast is that what's your favorite part about dynasty fantasy football? And
I think I participated in that one.
Right. and only 7% said winning, even though it was the top one. It was 28% trading. Another 20+% was rookie draft. Another one was rebuilding. So it's at any given time, only 3 or 4 teams are trying to win. Everyone else is doing something else that is suboptimal to the team. And, that's definitely a leak in dynasty players' games. But I'm here with Joe Bartle from RotoWire.com, and we are talking about buy low wide receivers. And we're going to define buy low as any player that we believe is going to increase in value over the summer, during the season, or even into the next offseason. So we might talk about some guys that are wide receiver 50 range, and we're going to talk about some players that could be in your top 25 because we think that this wide receiver 25 might be wide receiver 10 next year. So what seems like an overpay today, Joe, may not be an overpay tomorrow. So
that's really key. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And so you have Jameson Williams on your list.
I do. And I guess I'll defer to you. You did a ton of rookie drafts last year, not just startup rookies, but actual just here's the rookies. Mm-hmm. Where did you typically see Jameson Williams go among those rookies from last year?
3rd, 4th.
Right.
I mean, sometimes if somebody, as it got closer and the reality that he wasn't playing this year, he would drip into pick 8 or 9. But he was, he's literally the only wide receiver that hasn't hit in this class. And it's only because he hasn't played.
Yes. I would see him. I think I did, 4 rookie drafts, and that's not counting some of the Devy League stuff that I do with AutoNew, which I still love that format quite a bit. But I had a good idea of how I want to rank the rookies, and a lot of people were going to have Kenneth Walker near the top. A lot of people have Breece Hall number 1 overall. I mean, that was kind of the consensus, not in the same way that Bijan Robinson is now today, but Breece Hall was the consensus 1. And then you kind of had your pick of the receivers. Your boy Garrett Wilson. I like Drake London. There's Jameson Williams in that same category too. You talked to Mario Puig, I'm sure you're going to have on a little bit later. Chris Olave was in the group. And all of those guys ended up being pretty darn good. I think Drake London was the down year, and that's only because he didn't have touchdowns because the Falcons are dumb. So I think there's a point. I did this exercise both with Jake Latarski at the end of our weekly waiver wire pickup podcast, and then again on SiriusXM with Mario Puig a couple weeks ago. Redraft these rookies. Jameson Williams pretty clearly falls to 6, 7, 8, or 9, and like you mentioned, it literally has nothing to do with his talent. In fact, I think Jameson Williams, if you liked him then, you should like him now. But I think there becomes a point, especially in Dynasty, where you're looking at all these guys, Olave, Garrett Wilson wins Rookie of the Year, Drake London had almost over 1,000 receiving yards, and you get a bit envious, like, oh man, I made the wrong choice, even when we knew we had this information with Jameson Williams. I will gladly check in with whatever manager has Jameson Williams and just see if he feels a little bit bad. Maybe you want to give up a first-round pick this year for him. I look at the class this year, at least at receiver, there's a lot more question marks that I have from a talent perspective. Would you
say you have like pick 4 or 5 and you're on the clock and Jigba's there? Would you give up in Jigba for Williams?
Yes, 100%. And I actually like Jackson Smith-Njigba, the Ohio State receiver who fell off this past year, but put together just insane numbers his sophomore season when he was with Olave and Garrett Wilson. At that point, Marvin Harrison was only Marvin Harrison's son, not the upcoming greatest receiver of all time, if you talk to some people, when he is going to be draft eligible next year. So no, I would gladly trade Jameson Williams for Jackson Smith.
No, I'm saying which you'd rather have the Jackson.
I would rather have Jameson Williams.
Okay. You will get that
hands down.
You will get that trade done in Dynasty, and I love. See, this is the actionable advice that we're talking about here. We're not just saying, "Hey, buy low, sell high." I mean, it's like talking to my my shady stockbroker. Like I think that you're actually giving a piece of advice. So you watched Njigba and Williams. I think there was even talk last year that he could have been the wide receiver 1 in this class had he been healthy. So, and with DJ,
I don't want to. I'll pause because I think that's too high of praise. Like I really liked Drake London. When I'm looking for receivers, it's the bigger body types because it's projectable. Like his mass alone, Drake London should be more successful. Chris Olave is fast enough to be successful, but he's also bigger. And Jameson Williams was big enough as well too. But there's a little bit of concern that I have that it's dependent on the routes being effective, the scheme working, the quarterback throwing it to him to get there. And we all know with Jared Goff, there's some limitations from a deep ball perspective. I actually think there's Goff looked better as a deep ball pass than I anticipated. And I know you had a lot of Jared Goff early and we're willing to sell him. I'm thinking back to our 2-flex or 2 QB league in Vegas, right? You're trying to move off of Jared Goff as fast as you could because he was the number 1, 2, 3, 4 fantasy quarterback for the first quarter of the season. I don't know if Jared Goff is going to be the starting quarterback for the Lions in the near future. I would be actually a little bit surprised if they didn't use this extra draft capital to address what the future at the quarterback spot is going to be. But I actually think that will make Jameson Williams more expensive as the time comes. So now is the opportunity to pounce on Jameson Williams. And DJ Chark, I think, is going to go to a different team this offseason, which will open up even more opportunities. It's a guaranteed starting role. We saw when Williams was a little bit more healthy towards the end of the season, what he could do. I like him. I like him a lot. I would gladly trade number 4 or 5 pick for him.
Yeah. So like you said, you may not even have to do that, but I like that, Goff is probably at least the better than 50% chance to be the QB this year. And I like Goff when he has a solid offensive line, which, he had enough protection there to get the ball to Jameson Williams. And also it's like, I talked about, I may have even been with you. I've talked about it a bunch of times where you're right. They could use those 2 picks to, if Baltimore can't get the Lamar Jackson deal worked out, maybe there's a situation where Detroit gets Lamar Jackson and they give up the 2 first-round picks plus whatever else it takes. So, and then you won't be able to even get Jameson Williams on your team. So good pick right there. I also like that you outlined that DJ Chark, who was their deep ball guy, is a free agent. I mean, who knows? He could resign there. He might not. A lot of teams are going to be after him. The first player that I like Jerry Jeudy as a buy low, and there's a perception that it's probably less of a buy low now that Sean Payton is the coach. Right. I think there's some more Denver optimism. It opened my eye. A favorite fantasy football strategy of mine, Joe, is to look at what players did the last 2 months, 6 weeks, even 4 weeks of the season, and see if that is translatable to the next season. And Jerry Jeudy from weeks 14 through 18, which are the money weeks in fantasy football, was not a wide receiver 1. He was the wide receiver 1 overall. Now that was buoyed by a 3-touchdown performance that he had in one of those early weeks, but he had a 3-touchdown performance in one of those weeks. Those count, right? Even if you just, so I'm not saying he's a top, 5 wide receiver, obviously, but at his current ADP as like wide receiver 27, 26, like I think he is probably going to increase in value to around wide receiver 16. And you could see him having like wide receiver 11 value in PPR leagues. And now that there's optimism around Russ, I still think that if you have a if you have, you want to offer off two of your veterans that people like, and somebody has Jerry Jeudy, I mean, there's worth making offers out there. I'm going to put out a dynasty trade chart that makes suggestions, but I just think that Jeudy will increase in value over the next 6 months, 1 year, and certainly 18 months. So he's definitely a buy low for me. I like on your list that you have Elijah Moore because he was last year's fantasy darling, and nobody wants him right now.
Right. Yeah. Well, real quick with Jerry Jeudy, he's only 23. Like that. He's only 23 years old. If you recall, 2 years ago, when we're all ranking the upcoming rookie receivers, it was is CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy number one. It wasn't any debate. It was one of those two. I loved Jeudy. I still love his route running aspect. Obviously, Justin Jefferson was in that class, and now he's in a class of his own. But it's funny what we do in just 2 years. When I guess 3 years, more or less, Jeudy is not. He has not underperformed to the level where he just stinks. I think a lot of the circumstances have made things right, or made things wrong for him. But you are right. Sean Payton coming there, I think, adds a little bit more value to him. I love Jerry Jeudy a lot. I think that's a really good selection. But to your point with Elijah Moore, or I guess mine, I am anticipating a better quarterback situation in New York. I don't know if it's Aaron Rodgers. I don't know if it's Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't know if it's Derek Carr. I don't know if it's Matt Ryan. Literally anything would be better than what we have been currently doing with Zach Wilson and Mike White. And I kind of like Mike White. I think he might be something at least in the same vein as Brock Purdy. And I know everyone who's eager for the next Tom Brady is very upset that I just made those two comparisons. But Mike White is closer than Brock Purdy is to anything else. So sorry if that breaks you guys' heart. It's the truth. We haven't really given Elijah Moore a fair shot. Garrett Wilson is now the new shiny toy. Obviously won Rookie of the Year, and rightfully so. I think he was within that conversation. I want to see what happens when there's actually a good quarterback and actually a good system in place to make these receivers work. I don't anticipate Corey Davis is going to be there this season. I think they cut Corey Davis to some extent, or maybe they find a trade partner. So then if it is just Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore, by default, Elijah Moore is going to get more work, even if it is with Zach Wilson or Mike White, or whatever is a quarterback.
It won't be Zach Wilson.
I think they're going to improve that position. There's been way too much talk, either from the owners and the coaches, that something is coming. And
hey, Joe, it's got to be Jimmy Garoppolo, right? With the Robert Saleh connection,
right.
They don't have. He's a free agent, basically. Garoppolo's contract allows him. I mean, that just seems like so obvious.
I still thought Aaron Rodgers was obvious, and then we had the Devontae Adams stuff, and now Vegas has completely switched. I think it's far closer to 50-50 Rodgers to the Jets than it is the Raiders. I think it can go either way.
Question for you here: Elijah Moore or Jahan Dotson in Dynasty?
Jahan Dotson still.
Okay, so he's ranked higher. He is ranked higher.
I was really impressed with Jahan Dotson, and I was super low on him. I thought we were overvaluing what he did at Penn State, and that even though he was a bigger little receiver, he was a little bit of a little receiver still. And he's going to the Commanders, which is about the most dysfunctional franchise in professional sports, but certainly in the NFL. And all he did when he was healthy was produce and score touchdowns. And to see the Commanders used in that way, how many times did he get touchdowns in the back of the end zone? I mean, that's like reserved for the Travis Kelce's and the Dallas Goederts.
But he did it in college, right? I mean, he did do it. I
mean, that's why it translated and why everyone was higher on him. And I didn't think it would. I was wrong there. I would take Jahan Dotson over Elijah Moore.
Yeah. Okay. So Elijah Moore is a good buy low, and I think that's like the classic buy low because you can pay less than what was worth a year ago and will be worth in 6 months from now. I mean, there's going to be, without them playing an NFL snap, you are right that Elijah Moore, as soon as the quarterback signs, Elijah Moore goes up in value. So if you are in a dynasty.
Go ahead. Well, I'm sorry. I keep cutting you off here, but
no.
That's literally the perfect part of what I was talking about with the structure and plan at the beginning of this, is that you could trade for Elijah Moore today, February 13th, day before Valentine's Day. Surprise that with your girlfriend. Hey, I got Elijah Moore. She'll be really pissed at you. And then 6 months later, before the season starts, trade him for either equally liquid asset or maybe even better, because we assume the quarterback situation is going to improve. I guarantee you whoever has Elijah Moore will be happy to move off him and think he gets a win if you give him that win. And in 6 months, that win will be your windfall. Like, I think you could literally do it before he even plays a game and improve upon that asset. And that's what I want when I'm trying to do Dynasty. Take every asset I have and see if I can incrementally improve it and see what happens with that. I think Elijah Moore is the case example of that kind of strategy.
I'll give you an impossible either or. Rashad Bateman coming off the the injury. I mean, and by the way, if it's an either or, if you don't have an opinion, because I don't, So if someone's going to give me like one of those players plus a second round pick, I'm taking the pick. So do you have a lean on Bateman, who's been first round pick? He's going to do it this year. Oh wait, now it's twice in a row, right? So him or Elijah Moore, if you're on the clock and you're taking one of those guys.
So I should be clear. I have a whole lot of rookie cards of Rashad Bateman. I'm financially invested in Rashad Bateman in that sense. I think he's really good. I'm not positive it's my Big Ten bias or not, but I thought he was like when Tyler Johnson and Bateman were both at Minnesota, it was like, oh man, these are two really good receivers. And it turned out that it was Tyler Johnson that just wasn't all that good, but Bateman was making him, I think, a lot better than he is. I love Rashad Bateman a lot. I would take Bateman. I'd be happy to get the pick if that was the case. And I really believe even if the Ravens were to trade Lamar Jackson, which I don't know if they're going to today. Like I would say no, it's the case. Bateman is like a wide receiver one for a fantasy team in the sense that you're going to get production, much like you're talking about with Keenan Allen, Mike Evans, and stuff like that. Maybe not quite to that level. I have like a supreme amount of faith in Bateman turning it around when he has those opportunities in himself.
I was going to say, what if Lamar leaves? But that's all speculation. You know what? I was going to also just bring people behind the curtain here for a second. You know how I want to acknowledge a good podcasting skill that you have that I've noticed in this podcast, right? So what a piece of feedback that I see in a lot of YouTube videos are when podcasters are talking about a player for an extensive amount of time, they start saying he and them, and someone just tuning into the podcast doesn't know the player. What you do, Joe Bartle, is you repeat the player's name, which is fantastic. So it's hard. That's a skill, of experienced skill. So for those of you, if you love what Joe Bartle's doing, he keeps repeating the player's name. I do that too. I think that's taking your podcasting to the next level. So kudos to you. And before we continue with our buy low wide receivers, I just want to let everybody know that this podcast, all the RotoWire fantasy football podcasts, are sponsored by Underdog. Now, Joe, they sent me a commercial read, and I don't want to sit here and read a piece of paper to you. I just want to, because Joe and I both play on Underdog. Yes. If you love Bestball, if you love drafting in the offseason, just go to Underdog. I'm telling you, it's the best place to play fantasy football in the offseason. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, Bestball is you draft and then you leave it, right? It automatically inserts your best players in the draft. Underdog's open right now. You could do a $3 draft. You could do their big board draft, which has huge prizes, $1 million for $10. And also, if you use code RWNFL, RotoWire NFL, RWNFL, they will double your first deposit up to $100. So if you put in 100, they'll match 100. If you put in 10, they'll match 10 on the first deposit. So there's a link in the video description below in the podcast. Just click on it and you'll automatically get doubled up on your deposit. That's Underdog Fantasy. I was one of their first 1,000 customers, Joe. I've been playing Underdog. This is
the cool.
Yeah. Best place to play fantasy football. And again, I know they gave me a commercial read, but this is passion right here. I know, and we're going to do some live streaming of drafts. You and I just decided we're going to do that because it'll be interesting to play against some of the listeners and dominate.
Oh, we'll have to get the mute button out for all the swear words that I have. And to your point, again, to add to our live read here that Underdog didn't give us, but this is a Dynasty podcast. They have the rookies in the Underdog. I don't know if it's quite yet or if
no, it's there.
They're up. Right, they're there.
Yeah.
It's a really good way to learn what the general public is valuing. Obviously, the Bijan Robinsons of the world, we get it. He's the number 1 overall guy this year. We were talking on Twitter when you had posted like the rookie redraft rankings, and I was saying that Gibbs, the running back Jahmyr Gibbs for Alabama, went a little bit lower. Like you can literally see that on Underdog with how people are drafting. It's a redraft format, but the names are going to be the same, and the value in those contexts can easily be sussed out with doing a bunch of these Underdog best balls. So my 2 cents to that matter as well.
No, that's actually a really good 2 cents, because sometimes we forget that even in Dynasty, a lot of the rookies' value comes in the first year because their value can tank if they don't do well in their first year, right? I mean, that's just, or it can increase. Tyler Algier, Dameon Pierce, those guys. If they're going to be 5th, 6th round picks in redraft or in Dynasty startup drafts. So, all right, we're talking about buy low wide receivers for Dynasty fantasy football. And when we talk about buy low, we're talking about players that will increase in value in the offseason, possibly during the season. And somebody who, now this is a superstar. I'm talking about Cooper Kupp now. Cooper Kupp is a superstar. You weren't able to get him for anything less than 2 firsts. You can trade Cooper Kupp now for Jackson Smith and Jigba, right? I'm not saying you will do it, but somebody will do that trade. If you're on the clock and JSN is the wide receiver 1 in this class, and you're sitting there pick 4, pick 5 in a super flex draft, and you're ready to take wide receiver, and that's the Cooper Kupp manager, you can get him. And I don't this could backfire, because if he's the next whoever, fine, but it is the time to think about how to get Cooper Kupp. His value has never been lower because of the injury, because of the uncertainty around Matt Stafford. And if you look at the redraft consensus early best ball, Joe, he's still a first-round pick.
Oh, yeah. I think top 5 or 6 overall. If you were to do a rookie startup draft, I'm sorry, like just a dynasty startup, where does Cooper Kupp go? I mean, again, you have a lot more experience in it.
End of the second round, early third round, and sometimes late third in a super flex.
And I mean, in those, you can also draft JSN again, Jackson Smith-Njigba, the receiver from Ohio State, in those drafts as well too. So he's going earlier, I'd assume, than Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, well, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to actually pull up I did a dynasty draft the other day, which, by the way, I did it with the Fantasy Football Geek. It's posted right now on my Twitter at Alan Seslowsky and on the RotoWire YouTube page. We did a full dynasty startup draft, which you can watch live, or I just posted, let's see, Cooper Kupp, because I may have it wrong. Let's see, Cooper Kupp went, oh no, I got this right, baby. Cooper Kupp in a super flex draft went 3.5, Joe Bartle.
You have too many reps. Like I there's nobody in the world I trust more to identify the ADP on a startup startup dynasty draft than you. Like, you've done 75 million over the last year and a half. Like, it's going to be second nature. That's, instead of you're counting sheep, you're just counting where Cooper Kupp is his value wise.
So there you go. But there it is. Like, so in a startup draft, he's going to go before JSN, but this is the psychology of dynasty players. In a startup, Cooper Kupp goes first, but in a rookie draft, when you're on the clock and JSN runs a sick combine score and he's been lighting up the combine, you're going to be able to get, make the trade. So that's what's great. Hey, give me the I'm gonna have to turn off my air conditioner. It's blowing right on my neck. I'm like an old guy. Turn off the air condition. Anything else on Cooper Kupp? I mean, I'm assuming this is your type of trade, right?
I love that, especially you're able to get him for 1.4, whatever it is. It goes into what we'll find out more.
The air conditioning's killing me. Keep talking.
Okay, it goes over what we'll find in the next month and a half, where I think this rookie receiver class in particular is a little bit lighter than we've seen. And we've been so blessed, whether it be that Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy draft, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Jameson Williams this past year. There's more and more really solid, great rookie receivers than there ever has been. And each year it feels like there's 4 or 5 more. I don't know if that's the case. At least at the very least, there isn't as clear-cut of a number one. You keep mentioning Jackson Smith-Njigba, totally fine. I prefer Quentin Johnston, the guy from TCU.
Whoever your wide receiver wants.
I lean towards the bigger body dudes, but there's a possibility, and not quite out of the realm. We talked about this on the SiriusXM Friday show, where if Quentin Johnston runs like a 4, even like a low 4.5, he's kind of like uncharted territory in terms of what we've seen for NFL receivers. So that's my preference of receiver 1. Either way, this class is a little bit less, I really think. And then Kayshon Boutte's situation has kind of made it a little bit harder to decipher where I think these guys are going to go. All that to say, I'm more than happy trading a mid-first round pick for a guy like Cooper Kupp, a guy like Jameson Williams, and especially if I can get some later firsts or early seconds to really, I think, gobble up what's going to be a deep running back market. That's my preference in all this. So when we're talking about different trades and whatever else, that's how I'm operating. Again, I have a structure. I'm not even in that many dynasty and keeper leagues like you are. I have a structure and plan as to how I want to operate. And I was already planning this out a couple of years in advance now at this point. And it's been nice to kind of see it happen in fruition. It's played out the way I thought it would, although we'll have to see. Everything changes when we're all in our underwear come the combine. So it might be a little bit different in a couple of months.
All right. You have Courtland Sutton as a buy low.
Yeah, it's the same way as Jerry Jeudy. And I thought Jerry Jeudy will be a little bit more expensive, and that probably seems to be the case given their ages. I think Courtland Sutton's going to be entering his age 27 season.
No, he's 27.3 right now. That means next year he'll be
entering his age 28, right?
Yes.
Okay, so same thing. And this was with the context of Sean Payton adding a bit more value. We always do this in the fantasy community, you and I, Alan, as experts. Oh, who's going to be the next X player for this next X coach? And I think classic point is going to be Michael Thomas, right, with Sean Payton. So we did this 2 years ago with Joe Lombardi joining the Chargers. Oh, Mike Williams is the next Michael Thomas. At what point can we stop associating players with the coaches? Like, you shouldn't be able to do 2 or 3 or 4. So I get a little bit annoyed when you said, even though I was literally doing the same thing with Mike Williams, because that's how Joe Lombardi was using Mike Williams. I really want to know what the difference is with Sean Payton's offense and Joe Lombardi. Is Javonte Williams and the running backs going to get as many catches as Alvin Kamara, or is Kamara just that special? Yes, he is. Is there going to be Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy that operate the same way as Michael Thomas, or like Henderson, that speed receiver, which could be that Jerry Jeudy role? I think if you are to do this correctly, and you are Sean Payton, and you have a lot to lose by joining the Broncos, obviously you have a lot of money, but you are in this air of one of the best coaches right now currently, and maybe all time if you do things right. I think you want to play to Russell Wilson's strengths, and Russell Wilson is not Drew Brees. He's not throwing these short passes, these slant plays. I think there's going to be more deep ball opportunities for Courtland Sutton. There's going to be more things schemed better, because I think you have to scheme better than Nathaniel Hackett. Again, sorry, as a Jets fan, I know you're going to be dealing with that in the coming months. But I think Sean Payton by default has to scheme things better. And while Jerry Jeudy is totally fine, I think you can get Courtland Sutton for even less than Jerry Jeudy.
Wait, dude.
And still have the production.
Yeah, nobody wants Courtland Sutton. So if you believe that there's bounce back opportunity there, then see, like, I don't. I'm not in that camp, but I'm always open to being wrong. You know, I mean, it was only a couple of years ago that he had a 1,000-yard season, was like wide receiver, you know, so I can understand. And talk about like a classic. This is a classic buy low. Was a player that everyone was pushing each other out of the way to go get last year. And now he's like in the corner. I forgot your name. Right. And he's that age. The little player card, when you click on him, is going to say age 28 next season. So that is kryptonite for the Dynasty Bros. So, you know, again, it's not someone who I thought of to even, but this is a player you can literally just trade any second round pick for. Like, somebody's going to do it. And
difference between Mike Evans and Keenan Allen, like, those guys have produced for a long time. Courtland Sutton, not so much. And that's where I get the little bit cheaper value, where I think he's a very easy plug and play wide receiver 2 or 3, whatever your situation might be. Because again, while we can't do the Elijah Moore thing per se, where we trade for Elijah Moore today and then by the start of training camp get more for him, I bet you by week 4 or 5, when the Broncos offense literally has to look better than what we've seen, unless you really believe Russell Wilson has fallen off. And that, I mean, that's kind of the argument here, is that if Russell Wilson really is one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, and he was for large stretches last year, fine. Then there isn't going to be value for Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. But I just don't believe that's the case, because after Nathaniel Hackett left, Russell Wilson looked okay. He looked average, and he won't be dealing with thumb in hand and whatever injuries he had last year, theoretically. So, no, I think Courtland Sutton is like the perfect example of the tier below Mike Evans and Keenan Allen.
Oh, yeah.
That I will gladly dive into for my depth receivers.
In startups, he's going wide receiver 48, wide receiver 50. I mean, you could just pick the round that you want him in. So if you believe in him, So I think what we're going to do now is I'm going to, just for this next pick, I'm going to add one of, people like these, like, spicy, like this is going to be my spicy guy. But what I want everyone to do, if you're watching the video, we're just going to put a pause right here. If you're on the audio podcast, just stick with us through this commercial break. And we're back. The RotoWire Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Alan Zaslowski of RotoWire.com. Looking at Joe Bartle. What a handsome guy, right? I mean, if you want to see the video, I put the video in the audio description link below. And, comment. Who's more handsome, Joe or me? I think actually, I'm setting myself up for a disaster here, Joe. I can't compare.
I don't know. That's okay. I don't have nearly as clean bald head as yours. So,
but yeah, I mean,
a personal preference for some people.
Joe, you're at least an 8.5, man. I'm a solid 6. I'm telling you.
We're both 10s at the Vegas pool.
My God. We were studs. We got to keep the waitresses off us. The cocktail waitress wouldn't leave us alone, Joe. All right. So we're talking about dynasty buy lows, players that we think will increase in value. And we've talked about some star players like Courtland Sutton. We've talked about some last year's stars that were a little bit duds this year. Elijah Moore. I'm just going to go. There's Calvin Austin, the
Steelers receiver.
Steelers wide receiver, ran the fastest time at the combine, basically didn't get on the field, was injured. Now, the Chase Claypool's gone.
Yep.
Right? Deontay Johnson is there. George Pickens, I think is a little overpriced in drafts right now. So there's going to be an opportunity for a deep threat. And this is why they drafted him in the 4th round, Calvin Austin, right? And he's, no one's going to, you're going to offer a 3rd round pick for Calvin Austin. People are going to get suspicious. What you need to do is when you're doing larger trade deals, say, all right, throw in Calvin Austin in it and we'll do this deal. So if you just target him, you're not going to get him because someone's going to look at you sideways unless you overpay. So we don't want to do that because his trade value, if you want to have fair, is like a 4th round pick in rookie drafts, which, it's silly. So you have to figure out larger trades what I like to do. One of my favorite strategies, Joe, is to ask people, say, hey, I need a wide receiver. Of these like 6 or 7 wide receivers can you rank them? What order? So I'm having you
Matthew Berry. That's the Matthew Berry special. Yes.
There you go. There you go. Have them rank their own wide receivers. You can see where they put Austin. And then you're like, hey, I'd like this guy and that guy. So Austin's a guy I'm targeting. Obviously, there's no floor. We haven't even seen him play an NFL snap, but I like his upside. I like his speed. And I think there's going to be an opportunity for him to have a stat line that's like 5 targets, 3 catches, 70 yards, maybe a touchdown, and perfect guy to have on the back of your roster. I usually like to keep the back end of my roster running back heavy, but he's a player that popped out for me. 19 touchdowns at Memphis the last couple of years. So it looks like he could be Jahan Dotson very light.
So it's funny because I think that's Tyquan Thornton for me. And we'll talk about Tyquan Thornton in a second because
he's my cover guy. I love Thornton. I'm glad
that's a really good transition for the two. How many receivers under 165 pounds do you know to be successful in the NFL, Alan?
I 0.
Not many. I don't know. Like Deshaun Jackson might have been around that same thing, but
I think he was like 175, 180. Deshaun Jackson.
Yeah, I'm thinking like the peak punt returner Deshaun Jackson. I feel like there got a bit of a weight as he got, which was good because he needed it throughout the NFL. But peak punt returner Deshaun Jackson his first 2 or 3 years maybe was sub 170, but I think he was 5'10", and also was like uncategorically faster than Calvin Austin. There are some concerns, and you could look this up because it was like readily talked about, but we kind of just ignore it from the dynasty perspective that all the 40 times, especially with the running backs and receivers, were a little bit wonky relative to past years. So the whole point of doing the combine and why I was annoyed with the conversation by
175 Deshaun Jackson.
Okay, so great. So 13 pounds more than Calvin Austin right now. But I think there was that conversation by Vincent, the former Bills safety that's now the NFL players, whatever, complaining about the combine and how they shouldn't do anymore. The reason we do is so we can compare the players across different generations. We have a standardized way in doing so. I think that's very valuable, and I hope they continue to do that. But the 40s were a little bit messed up. So while Calvin Austin probably is a sub 440 guy, when you're running at 5'9", 162 pounds, you can be faster than a Deshaun Jackson at 175 pounds and 5'10". I am also a disciple of Mario Puig, which you could have already told by the way I'm discussing the size part of it. I don't like Kenny Pickett. So like you can talk about the value in which that Calvin Austin might be able to have. I don't think Kenny Pickett is a good enough quarterback to do it just because he can engineer some fourth quarter comebacks. Oh, by the way, created because he was so bad for the first 3 quarters. It doesn't make much of a deal to me on Calvin Austin. I think if Deontay Johnson was traded and you said guaranteed there's going to be some more slot work that goes to the outside, right? You can play in the slot, but if Calvin Austin at 5'9", 162 pounds is catching passes in the middle, the Kaiser Whites of the world are going to kill him. He's going to be creamed. But if you're doing those fade corner routes, a little bit on the outside, the jet bubbles to the left, you're mitigating the hits. That's different. But I feel like that's kind of the downside of Kenny Pickett is he can't really make those throws. So I have reservations about Calvin Austin.
Do you think Pickett is below the threshold of like NFL starter? I mean, how?
Yes.
Oh wow. Yeah. So you
well,
don't
like
even.
I think he's like if you're ranking. Because we'll put the quarterbacks higher, especially younger ones, because it's a valuable position. But if you say, here's 32 quarterbacks, they all start in the NFL, Kenny Pickett is near the bottom of that list. I'm not sure he is the bottom, but if you put everyone healthy, Jameson Williams or Jameson Winston over Andy Dalton, for example, that kind of thing, Kenny Pickett is near the bottom for me. And I was not convinced last year coming out of college. I wasn't convinced in his play, and I feel like we had some fourth quarter comebacks that you can credit the defense of Mike Tomlin, who's still one of the best coaches of all time, that give credence to Kenny Pickett being successful as opposed to the player himself.
I like Kenny Pickett better than you for fantasy football. I think that he's at least insulated for the next 2 seasons because Pittsburgh's too good to get a quarterback, and there's not many great appealing options. So he would really have to tank for him not to be the starter for the next 2 years. And I think that he could be Ryan Tannehill-esque as for his receivers, for fantasy football. So I guess I'm a little bit higher on him. And again, Calvin Austin, as I stated, no floor, but I do like guys like this that are super fast. And let's transition because Tyquan Thornton, New England Patriots, did flash, someone we both like very much. Right. I had him on my list, but go ahead. Why do you think Tyquan Thornton's a buy low? I did buy low on Tyquan Thornton. I'll tell you a deal I made before Daniel Jones blew up in whatever that last run was. Yeah. In a Superflex draft, I traded away Najee Harris while he still had some value. Good. Got Daniel Jones and Thornton back.
Okay. So I guess I kind of thought Thornton would be in the same range of Calvin Austin, pretty much free. And that seems like it's not the case, right?
He's a little bit higher, but it's a little bit higher. Here, I'm going to look as you're talking. I'll give you his ranking.
So yeah. I think I try not to get swept up in the beat reporters and everything else like that, especially when we're all thirsting for information in late July and early August. But if you recall back to that point, Tyquan Thornton was like the highest riser, even more than Romeo Doubs, who I thought couldn't get even higher of a rising situation with the Packers. But Tyquan Thornton was doing these incredible things. And while the Patriots offense continually looked bad in practice, and the beat reporters were saying this is going to be as ugly as it was for that first 6 weeks of the season for the Patriots, Tyquan Thornton was the one lone factor. Then he broke his foot, was out for a minimum of 4 games. I think he ended up missing a little bit longer going off of memory. But he comes back and he just produces. Kind of in the same way as Rashad Shaheed, maybe we'll talk a little bit later too for the Saints, but just kind of produced when he was out there in limited capacity. I strongly believe the Patriots are going to do something at receiver to allow Tyquan Thornton to be playing more. So Jacoby Myers is a free agent this season. You look at the free agent class, Alan Lazard, Super Bowl winner, Juju Smith-Schuster, Chark are kind of your top options. It's a lower free agent receiver class. It wouldn't surprise me at all if a team pays for Jacoby Myers. He will not come back to the Patriots. Let's go with that. Kendrick Bourne got that big contract signing 2 years ago. Has been okay in that production. I think could take over Jacoby Myers' role, but that's still not the guy that was in front of Tyquan Thornton. You have Devontae Parker. Who knows if he comes back? Maybe a cap casualty. Didn't produce all that well. There's a way that the Patriots could really reconfigure this receiving core. And if that's the case, even one of those moves happened, much less 2 or 3.
Did I spell his name right, Joe? Is it Tyquan, A-N or O-N?
Tyquan.
Okay.
Thornton. Yeah.
Yeah. For those watching on the video, just so you know, I'm a horrible speller. So that's why I asked Joe.
You and my mom, it's the same way. She couldn't spell ball. It's fine.
All right. Yeah. No, I'm with you on Thornton, man. He flashed. He looked good. He looks like he could be, he was a second round pick. Second round pick wide receivers don't have the same insulation that a first round wide receiver did, but he looked, and Patriots have a long history of bad picks. Everything from the first round, N'Keal Harry, second round, Aaron Dobson. So I say that maybe they're due, right? Thornton was considered overdrafted in his draft position. But, I like him too. And, we're going to probably have to do part 2 of this at some point because we're, but I'm going to give you an opportunity. Give me your lightning round. No explanation of, 3 or 4 more guys that they're buy low. And then we'll just summarize. I'll give you a couple and then we'll finish up. So give me a lightning round of guys.
I mentioned Rashad Shaheed as well, too, rookie for the receiver for the Saints. You got him for nothing when you were playing Dynasty Stars, redraft, whatever else. He was available for nothing.
Waiver wire.
Free agent. Right. And has now produced. So there might be, like, if you were taking advantage of me, the guy that's trying to do this asset management thing, I got him for nothing. Yes, I'll give him up for a 3rd round pick or something like that. I think the Saints will improve at quarterback, if for no other reason than Jameis Winston starts at quarterback over Andy Dalton. And yes, I do still think that's an improvement, but there's also the Derek Carr factor. Rashad Shaheed can play 100% for me. Yeah. I'm down for that. I like DJ Chark as well, too, with the idea that he does not stay with the Lions. I really believe he's going to be a sought-after target, not in the same way that Christian Kirk was, but kind of like there's going to be value for multiple teams.
What team do you think maximizes his value? 1 or 2 teams that maximize Chark's value?
I actually think the Bears, in the way that they thought Claypool could. I think DJ Chark, if he's going to be healthy and able to play, can maximize that value with a guy like Justin Fields, who you have to worry about scrambling. Obviously, they have the most cap space. That's one. If he went to the Texans as well, too, like let's just say John Mechie still isn't back yet from his unfortunate cancer situation. Brandon Cooks wants to go to a different team. You could easily plop in Chark, give him a bigger deal, over 2 years, get a compensatory pick when you're actually competitive. I like that a lot too.
I got one for you there. One second before you
the other one.
Before you say Cooks, because I like that too, is Shark. If Juju ends up not re-signing with the Chiefs, how about?
Oh,
Shark
yes,
yes. It's going to be.
I mean, like, you want a slot receiver, but I think Sky Moore can kind of do that pretty well. I'm actually a little bit higher on Sky Moore. Not as high as like John and Mario were, certainly, but I think Sky Moore can be better than Kadarius Toney, and I think that's a blasphemous statement for a lot of people to hear, but I'm right there with it. So the other one was Brandon Cooks. I really think he does get moved from the Texans this offseason. It's been rumored for the past 2 years now. He was really unhappy this trade deadline that he didn't get traded. I think Brandon Cooks goes to somewhere and will be, again, a 1,000-yard receiver like he's been for the Rams, Patriots, Saints,
what he does.
Texans. He's going to be effective, and you could get him probably even less than Courtland Sutton. I think he's a perfect wide receiver 3 for any sort of team.
Yeah, in dynasty leagues where you have 3 wide receivers and you just need to solve that position because everyone's fighting over the youthful guys. I think Joe gave you a list of guys that are easily attainable. Not easily, but you can strategically attain them and they can give you that production you're looking for. The other guys I had on my list is I still think that elite players stay elite at the quarterback position, and Deshaun Watson, love him, hate him, whatever. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to be a very viable top 36 wide receiver. You could probably still get him. And then obviously that also David Bell, the rookie who didn't do much for the same exact reasons. Other guys lightning round. Pittman, I think right now before they get a quarterback that anyone likes is still, you can get him. He was thought of as a top 10 dynasty wide receiver just a year ago. And then the last player is, if you still believe in Gabe Davis, it's time to buy him, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm a little more bearish than I was, but I think that's reflective of the market. All right, everybody. As always, the RotoWire Dynasty podcast is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. All the links are in the video description below if you want to play Underdog. Follow Joe on Twitter at JB Fantasy Sports. And Joe also has a new podcast of his own. He's going to be doing in the RotoWire podcast feed where you find this podcast. He's going to be doing offseason more best ball and redraft focused along with Jim Coventry. So that's a new podcast starting in February of 2023. So I'll be appointment listening to that. So should you. Joe, anything else you're working on that you want everyone to know about?
No, I think the podcast is going to be pretty big. I get to do a lot of these shows with you, or not a lot. I wish we did more, but
I know
you're the FSTA superhero, right? Getting all the awards right now. Jim Coventry is about the same as well too. So I have to live up to the pedigree of both of you. To do this with Jim on Wednesdays is going to be great. And I kind of been structuring it in my mind is we're going in the tape with this. I think you do a lot of really good coverage of the Dynasty stuff, and John and Mario really cover a lot of the angles on Thursday. So there's more we can dive from the film perspective, and Jim has pages and pages of notes, except for the Super Bowl, right? The 13-page dossier,
20-page manifesto.
Yes. Yeah, I mean that's it for literally every team, every game. I think there's some value in that, and for me, the part that I love most is the offseason, but the contract stuff and figuring that out. And I think combining the two is an area that we can only benefit more as RotoWire. So that's really going to be the structure, at least for the off-season shows, and tackling each division and what that means with the draft as well too. I think it's going to be really wrapped up nicely. I'm nervous excited. Normally anything that I do nervous excited turns out really well, and I don't boast about myself too often. So Wednesday podcast, looking forward to doing that, and it'll be good, just as we lead into the draft to get more football coverage going.
All right, everybody. Dynasty season's here. If you have any questions about any of the players that we talked about today, you can DM Joe at JB Fantasy Sports or at Alan Sislowski. We're happy to do any follow-up or any answers. If you like videos like this, consider hitting the like button or subscribe to the channel. We put up a new Dynasty podcast, new video every week. All right, everybody, run those trades by us, get into some Dynasty leagues, and have a good offseason.